One day, a wise man was asked by one of his students, "Wise one, why is that sometimes God seems to be unfair? Why is it that sometimes when we pray to Him to take away our problems, that's when the problem seems to increase? How really does God work in our lives?" After giving much thought to the question, the wise man told the student a story that went like this. Once upon a time, there lived a king who really loved flowers. His obsession with flowers was unmatched. His palace was surrounded by acres and acres of beautiful flowers that made the place look like a little heaven. Each and every morning when the king woke up, before anything else, he would go to the gardens to smell the fragrance of his beautiful flowers. However, due to the fact that different flowers grow in different climatical conditions, not all flowers grew in the palace gardens. For this reason, each year during the spring season, the king together with his servants would embark on a journey to the mountains to witness the blooming of some of the rarest types of flowers. Back then, horses were a luxury that could only be afforded by the kings and the nobles. Therefore, while the king traveled by horse, his servants would trek the whole distance carrying heavy loads on their backs. The journey itself took 1.5 days on foot, and the king would camp in the mountains for 3 days before returning back home. So one day while the king was preparing for his annual camping trip, one of his male servants approached him and told him, "Your Majesty, if I found favor in your sight, I would like you to assign me the lightest load to carry, as we embark on your journey to the mountains, as I am an old man, and my strength is waning." Smiling, the king assured the male servant that he would honor his request and that he would be assigned the lightest load. With tears of happiness streaming down the old man's face, he thanked the king and went back to the servants' quarters. However, on the material day of the journey, the male servant was assigned a load that was by far the heaviest to carry. The load contained the food supplies for all the servants and the king during the journey. The old servant felt so offended by the king, but because he couldn't complain to him, he had no other choice but to carry the load. In his heart, he murmured and cursed the king for his cruelty and lack of consideration for his frail condition. When the journey started, the old servant could hardly walk. The load was too heavy for him, and while his fellow servants seemed to walk with ease, he was really struggling to make steps. He felt despaired as he tried to match the other servants' speed. He cursed the days that were ahead of him, and all the struggles he would have to go through for the entire journey. All along, the king would look at the old servant and smile to himself. The old servant saw this as a mockery from the king, but he couldn't do anything about it but soldier on. After hours of traveling, the king ordered everyone to take a rest and eat their lunch. The old servant's load was unpacked, and everyone served their lunch. When it was time to resume the journey, everyone picked their load, and that's when the old man realized that his load had become a little lighter. Feeling rejuvenated, the old man walked with less difficulty and he complained less. By evening that day, when the group had eaten their supper, the old servant's load became lighter and lighter. The more lighter his burden became, the more the old man understood why the king had given him the heaviest load to carry despite his earlier request. By the time the king was returning home after his camping was over, the old servant had no burden to carry at all. He approached the king and told him, "I'm sorry I didn't understand you at first, but now I do." After he finished narrating the story to the student, the wise man looked at him and told him, "Son, the king represents God, the old servant represents you, the load represents life's challenges, the fellow servants represents your friends, and the journey to the mountains represents your life." Sometimes we cry to God for help, but the more we pray, the more life seems to be burdening us with more challenges. It's true that it's not always that we will clearly understand what God is really doing in our lives. Sometimes, and especially when we see that our friends are doing well in life than us, we start lamenting to God for delayed answers. However, always remember that God assigns the toughest battles to His toughest soldiers. Don't give up. Just like the old man, sooner or later you will understand why God gave you the heaviest load to carry. He uses hardships to mold our character in the best way He knows how. Just keep the faith,